Is the European Union facing a new refugee crisis? Turkey carries out its threat to open its borders with EU members Greece and Bulgaria. Do EU leaders have the political will to tackle the potential influx of tens of thousands? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. So, Turkey and the European Union are on a new collision course because of the millions of war refugees and migrants it's looking after. Tens of thousands, mostly Syrians exiled in Turkey, are heading towards the borders with Bulgaria and with Greece. And that's after Turkey announced it was easing border controls following the killing of 34 Turkish soldiers in an airstrike in Idlib, Syria's last remaining rebel-held province. Turkey's president has long threatened to open what he calls the floodgates of refugees if European allies didn't provide more support in Syria. Recep Tayyip Erdogan accuses the EU of failing to keep its promises in the 2016 deal to send billions of dollars in return for sheltering Syrian refugees. Well, migrants who made their way to the Greek border by boat and by land are now stuck. Local media say that 10,000 people have been prevented from entering since Saturday. Many, though, are determined to keep going until they reach Western Europe.
I've been here at the border for 3 days. The situation here is tragic. I'm not here alone. There are some young men alone, and it's fine. They don't care about tough conditions. But I have my whole family with me, and it's very difficult. No one is helping us. No one gave us anything to protect ourselves from the cold. Everyone has taken advantage of us. They take us here and there. People are merciless.
We won't give up. We insist on going through, God willing, because we can't live here anymore. We're working for nothing here. Everything is pointless. We can't go to school. We can't do anything.
There's war in our country. We can't stay there. We live in Karaman city. The family didn't have Turkish identity cards, so some of the members went to Greece, and we also wanted to go there.
It's difficult to buy food. Life is very difficult for us. I don't know how my mother or father are. I don't know. One of my siblings lives in France. They got there 2 months ago.
Well, Greece is boosting security at its borders. The government has reportedly sent text messages to migrants telling them not to cross.
Those that have entered Greek territory have been arrested and detained. And in my mind, this is an illegal way of entering one country.
Let's get straight to it. Let's bring in our guests. From Berlin in Germany, we're joined by Gerald Knaus, who's the founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative think tank. From Birmingham in the United Kingdom, we have Mariana Karakulaki, who researches violence and borders at the University of Birmingham there. And in London, in the UK, Sanj Srikanthan is chief executive of Shelterbox. That's an international disaster relief charity working in northern Syria. Welcome to you all. Mariana, I'd like to start with you. Let's establish more about what's actually happening. The door has been left open by Turkey on the western border into Greece and Bulgaria. So what has been the result to date so far? And are we expecting the numbers of migrants to swell?
So far we have around 13,000 people waiting at the Turkish side at the Greek-Turkish land border, that is the Evros area. And there have been a high number of arrivals on the islands as well.
On the Greek islands?
On the Greek islands, on the 5 Greek hotspots that are under the EU-Turkey statement. It's highly unlikely that people will cross in masses from the land border because it's a highly militarized area. Frontex has said to deploy that it will deploy more troops on the area, and Greece is deploying more military personnel. So it will be quite difficult for people to cross in masses. This doesn't mean that they will not cross because the land border is a quite large area and the crossings are quite many. It's not only one crossing. It's throughout the whole land border.
So that means if this situation continues, we're going to get more and more people just gathering in their thousands, in their tens of thousands at the Turkish border there.
I believe so, especially if Turkey opens the border with Syria as well, because people will start fleeing from Idlib in Turkey and they will eventually arrive on the land border.
Right, well, we'll come on to that in a minute. Marianne, I just want to ask you one other thing. What about the reaction from Greece itself so far? And we've seen some arrivals, as you just alluded to, in Lesbos, an island which is very close to Turkey. How are residents there responding to this? And would this be a kind of reflection of the broader picture across Europe should thousands of migrants get onto the mainland?
The residents on the island generally have reached the limits, especially after 2016 with the EU-Turkey statement and the situation it has created. There have been, the past few days, there have been mass protests by locals and quite violent protests. Some of them have been initiated by the far right and people who are known to be members of Golden Dawn, the Greek neo-Nazi party. However, that does not mean that everyone is part of this. Everyone is part of the far right that is taking place there. Because let's keep in mind that Moria camp at the moment has 23,000 people, around 23,000 people, and it can hold a little less than 3,000 people. The situation is unbearable, and it cannot be controlled.
San Srikanthan, if I can come to you in London, those that are moving now, they're all part of this, 3.7 million refugees that Turkey has taken in. Where are they from primarily, and where have they been living to up until this point?
Well, that's right. They're the 3.7 million that Turkey has generously hosted for many years. Some of them will have been in Turkey for many, many years since the beginning of the conflict, and others will have been newly displaced. They're not always the same people. Some Syrians do return to Turkey and then return back to Turkey, back and forth. And so they are in a precarious situation in that life in Turkey is at least safe, but it isn't a long-term future. They have sometimes family members already in Western Europe that they're trying to join. And in other cases, they are trying to support family members in Syria. So they're trying to make the best of a situation, and they know that the window through which to get to Western Europe might be very short, so they're taking advantage of it. Unfortunately, they're unlikely to receive a very warm welcome, and the conditions, as Mariana said, in some of the camps in Greece are really at overcrowding breaking point. And what Greece really needs to see is more solidarity from European member states, because of course this is not a European refugee crisis, it's a Syrian crisis. That's where the real crisis is, and Europe needs to always keep that in perspective.
And Gerald Knaus, you're from the European Stability Initiative. Is Europe going to provide the solidarity that Turkey and Greece need?
Well, I wish I could tell you yes, but the evidence of the last few months is obvious that no. Europe has thrown away the one part of its policy that has worked. It has, for many, many years, supported millions of refugees in Turkey. It's been the most generous financial support to a third country. And this was justified because there are 3.5 million Syrians plus a few 100,000 others in Turkey for many years already. But the EU has hesitated and has not agreed to prolong this money. And what we are seeing here is governments in Athens and in Ankara driven by fear and desperation. In Turkey, the number of refugees keeps growing. There are no signals from the EU that it will continue to support Turkey. The number of refugees on the Turkish border has grown, hundreds of thousands in Idlib. And in Greece last year, we had 75,000 people arrive. The number is increasing. And today I heard that 500 people arrived in a day, which means 15,000 in a month if this continues. Now, to put that in perspective, in the first year after the EU-Turkey statement in March 2016, in 1 year, only 26,000 people came. So now, if this continues in 1 month, more people, or almost as many people will arrive in 2 months. And if in the conditions that we have on the islands, this will add to the pressure. We are seeing the collapse of support for legality. We are seeing pushbacks, tear gas, boats being pushed back. And this will be the end of the Refugee Convention in Europe, at Europe's border. And a lot of European governments have long said that this is what they want. If you listen to some of the European prime ministers in recent years, they've always said, already in 2015, that there is no need to help Turkey, to help refugees. All you need to do is build a fence and push people back. which would be
So,
shameful.
Gerald, who is to blame here?
Point.
Is this Erdogan says that this is basically down to the fact that the EU has not honoured its side of the agreement. It hasn't coughed up the money that it promised it would. Who's at fault?
Well, the EU has mobilized 6 billion, but and this money has been programmed. It's all programmed by the end of last year. Now there are lots of working programs to support Syrians whose number is increasing simply through the birth of Syrian children in Turkey every year by 100,000. But now the EU has not made clear that it will continue. This is madness. So one thing, if we're talking about what should happen now, one thing that should happen now, disregard that it's completely unacceptable for Turkey to bus refugees to the border. This is unacceptable. But the point is, it's in Europe's interest, it's in Turkey's interest, and it's in the interest of refugees that the EU makes clear it will continue to support the country with most refugees in the world. And it will continue to support Greece by helping decongest the islands, moving the tens of thousands now there, and at the same time put in place a program that the number of arrivals falls again. In 2016, after the EU-Turkey statement, 17, 18, the number of arrivals were very low. It was 30,000 a year.
Okay. All right, Gerald, we're going to move on from that. We're going to move on a little bit because, of course, it's not just the western border that's a pressure point. We've already talked about it. Mariana has talked about the pressures on the southern border. Let's have a look at a map of just how it's all shaping up. Turkey has the largest number of Syrian refugees, close to 4 million, as we've already talked about. When Turkey's leaders announced on Friday that border guards wouldn't stop refugees and migrants entering the European Union, they started heading to border crossings with Bulgaria and with Greece, which you can see up there in the west. And thousands of them are stranded in the city of Edirne in northwest Turkey. Other refugees have gone by sea in dinghies to the Greek island of Lesbos. Now, this is the point. To the southwest, Turkey is worried about yet another influx of Syrian refugees as fighting intensifies in Syria's last rebel-held province of Idlib. Thousands of Syrians, tens of thousands, are trapped near the border with Turkey. And Mariana, let's explore that a little bit more. What are your concerns about the situation down there and what might happen given the current crisis in Idlib?
Well, if the current crisis in Idlib continues, which will continue, people will start, and Turkey opens that border as well, people will start crossing from Idlib and they will eventually reach Greece and possibly Cyprus as well, because the numbers have also increased in Cyprus.
Will the Turks allow them to cross?
It will depend on the EU's reaction, which so far the only thing that I have seen that they have said is that they will support Frontex, and the Frontex will deploy more military personnel. So I suppose we have to wait and see what the actual reaction of the EU will be. And in my opinion, giving more money to Turkey is not a solution, because giving money to an authoritarian regime does not work. And it will not work because the way that they operate is not democratic, and it's not stable, if I can say stable.
Okay, Sanj, let's bring you in. This is your patch, is it, where your relief charity works primarily in northern Syria. What's your sense of the situation?
I'm not sure Turkey is in a rush to open the Syria-Turkey border. They are still active on the ground, of course, in Idlib. There have been bombings tit for tat, Syrian airstrikes on Turkish positions and Turkish airstrikes on Syrian positions. So they still hope to create that buffer zone and safety area for Syrians who have fled this conflict. Unfortunately, there is no military solution. At the same time, Turkey doesn't necessarily want to open its borders again. If it's trying to make a political statement to the EU, it can do it with 3.6 million people, which frankly is deplorable that refugees are being used in this pawn chess game to get a point across to the EU. But I do think that the ultimate solution is really an EU-Turkey-Russia conversation around a lasting peace in Syria. Treating the symptoms is dealing with tens of thousands trying to get to Europe. The actual problem is Syria itself, and that's where the great powers need to work together. And I still hope that the Merkel, Macron, Putin, Erdogan meeting that was supposed to happen on March 5th is still planning to go ahead.
But we all know how hard it is, Sanj, don't we, to resolve the Syrian crisis. And this more immediate result of what's going on in Idlib is a clear and present danger. Well, it's present right now.
Well, if we're talking about realpolitik, it's clear that these bombings and the changing areas of control, Sarkib, which was the M4, M5 junction town, fell into rebel hands. The Assad forces are now trying to retake it. It's clear that a military solution, realistically, is quite far away from all sides. And all sides claim to care about the Syrian people and bringing peace to Syria. So if the reality is you can't win a military conflict, you need to get to the negotiating table, even if you forget and put aside the fact that there's children dying on a daily basis, and that should be a moral reason to sit at the table. The combination of that and the lack of a military stalemate should bring all sides together. Unfortunately, we need some grown-ups at that table, and that's where I think Russia and Turkey and the EU have an important role to play.
Yes, morals have been few and far between in all of this, haven't they? Gerald, if I can come back to you. So if Erdogan is trying to force the issue, he's trying to gain leverage over the European Union, over their inaction in Idlib, will this work?
I don't think so, and I don't think Turkey has any illusions about real military support. But what the signal that we would need to give, and I disagree with the previous panelist, if a country hosts for many, many years millions of refugees, and there is a prospect, and we want Turkey, if there is a fear for the lives of hundreds of thousands in Idlib, we want Turkey to allow those who are at risk and vulnerable to reach safety. Then we need to make sure that the Turkish public, and this across all parties and all parts of society, understands that Europe will keep helping them. We have 680,000 Syrian students in Turkish schools now, and 1.7 million Syrians who get social support. And when I hear people say, let's just cut that, let's not prolong this, then I don't understand the morality, but I also don't understand what the realpolitik is. Because we don't want Turkey, if there are people at risk for their lives, to treat them at the Turkish-Syrian border, which is now closed, in the way Europeans have been dealing at some of their borders, as we see today, with tear gas, stopping and pushing everyone back. This is really the future of the Refugee Convention. I mean, refoulement, pushing people back into danger without identifying their individuality, is illegal. And we are seeing it at more and more places openly happening.
Sanj, go ahead.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Sorry, I may have come across incorrectly. I don't think Turkey will open the Syria-Turkey border. I think it should open the Syria-Turkey border. So that there's a difference in what I was saying. And I totally agree that the Refugee Convention does require Turkey and other member states to take on the responsibility for these refugees. It's just I'm not sure in terms of the politics it's going to happen, even though we all agree it should. And the safest place for those fleeing Idlib is Turkey. And Europe should share in the responsibility of hosting them there.
It's fairly evident, though, that President Erdogan doesn't want them, isn't it?
Well, I think he has done a great deal in taking 3.7 million. But there's a limit, and he's seeing his European support melt away, and that's leaving him to pause. The other issue is he doesn't, and no one else knows how long the Syrian conflict will go on for, and therefore his presence in Syria is about trying to affect that, whilst his actions with Europe are to give a dig to European countries to take on their commitments that they've promised in the past.
Marianne, I'm going to come to you in just a second, but Gerald, I just think you wanted to jump in there.
No, just to say that very clearly, Turkey would prefer them to stay in Syria, but it might not be an option. And what we saw a few days ago with the escalation of fighting, there is a risk of a few 100,000 at the wall. And then we want Turkey to open the border. And I think it's time for the international community to get together and send a clear signal that in that case, it will not be left alone. That is the kind of signal we need also to ease the tension on the western border of Turkey, which is the border of the European Union. Without partnership, without cooperation, there is no way to deal with these issues in a humane manner.
So, Mariana, when Turkey's communications director said that Turkey's migrants were also now Europe's problem and the world's problem, he's right, isn't he?
He's right. However, they are using refugees as a leverage to get the money that they want to get, because I think this is what Turkey wants. They want money, they want military support for Syria. However, I think that refugees should not be left in Turkey because there is massive abuse of human rights and instances of modern-day slavery. but they should be relocated within Europe, not only Greece, but throughout Europe, as it was happening before the EU-Turkey statement.
But we saw then how difficult that was, didn't we? That it was next to impossible to achieve. This is why we've ended up where we are now, isn't it?
Yes, it was difficult because the European North did not want people there. It does have the capacity to host people, it just doesn't want them because it destroys this white Christian dream that Europe has.
Gerald, you wanted to come in?
Well, just to say that before there was no resettlement from Turkey before the EU-Turkey statement, but the EU-Turkey statement says explicitly, point 4, that there should be resettlement. And I agree that this needs to be part of the policy. We need to offer Turkey that some of those who are vulnerable, Europe is taking in an orderly way. But what will never work, ever again, is that hundreds of thousands of people are just crossing borders disorderly, because what we will then see is what we've seen for months at the Croatian-Bosnian border, at the Hungarian-Serbian border, and what we see today at the Greek-Turkish border. We will have governments that use force to stop people, and everybody suffers. So the best thing would be to take the EU-Turkey statement seriously, for Europe to live up to its commitment. Point 4 in that statement says, we will take vulnerable people from Turkey, refugees, in an orderly way, by plane. Now, in return, the largest number will remain in Turkey. We will continue to support Turkey financially. And if there is a new influx, the international community stands ready as well. In 1979, a conference was held in Geneva for the boat people, the Vietnamese. And it was agreed that the transit countries would be helped. And this kind of conference UNHCR should organize now, because the people who are now looking for safety will not just disappear. They are there, and we will have to deal with them.
Right, Sanj, we're coming towards the end of the programme. Idlib, as we all know, is on the brink. If it does finally blow up, where is resolution going to come from? How will all these people cope?
Well, the short answer is they're already not coping. And bear in mind that those still in Idlib are amongst the most resilient Syrians, in that they have stuck it out through some absolutely appalling fighting. They don't know where the next bomb is going to drop. They don't know where the next meal is coming for their children. And that unpredictable nature means that if Idlib does blow up, I think those Syrians are going to head for the nearest safe border, which the closest is the Syria-Turkey border. Already camps like Atme, squeezed against the Turkish border, are at bursting point, and sanitation conditions, shelter, are inadequate. My organization, Shelter Box, is handing out shelter kits and household items so families can live. But these are all transitory solutions. Ultimately, they are looking for a peace. And at the moment, Syria blowing up, Idlib blowing up, just means more fighting. It doesn't mean a resolution to this conflict, because neither side seems to have the ability to win the conflict, but neither side seems to be willing to recognize that.
Mariana, is your sense that there is any political will within the European Union to tackle this influx of tens of thousands of refugees?
Of course there is such need, and there is need of European solidarity, which we have not seen so far. And of
but is
course,
there the will? I mean, there's a need, but is there the will?
No, there is no will, because the European North is not willing to help anyone other than itself.
And so finally, Gerald, if there is no will, what is your sense? Do you have any optimism at all about the situation?
Well, yes, because a lot of what needs to be done, we have done before. I mean, don't forget that the industrial country that took in most refugees in recent years in the world was Germany. And it has actually worked quite well. Half of those refugees are now working. You can make a case that in an orderly way, resettling people in need of protection, if there is a coalition of countries, Malaysia, Turkey, Germany, Canada, to deal with the biggest refugee crisis in decades, which is Syria, this could be handled. And in Greece too. If refugees in Turkey are supported, last year, the total number of Syrians who crossed the border to Europe was less than 15,000. So 99.5% of Syrians last year stayed in Turkey, because we've improved conditions there, and we should do more of this. But if we don't have leadership, if we don't have realism, if we don't find beyond the passion ways to work together, everybody will lose, and the biggest losers will be those men, women and children that we see now freezing at the Greek-Turkish border.
It's certainly a very troubling situation. Thank you all our guests, Gerald Knaus, Mariana Karokalaki and Sanj Srikanthan. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you too for watching. You can see at this programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, it's goodbye for now.